Welcome back to the deep dive, where we sort of dig into those really fascinating historical stories.
Absolutely.
And, speaking of historical kind of enigmas, did you ever hear that story about that medieval king who like accidentally knighted his foot?
I don't believe I have.
Yeah, it's apparently during the ceremony he kind of tripped, and well, you can imagine quite the blunder. I'm Hari,
And I'm Kimi.
and we're ready for another deep dive.
We are.
So, Kimi, today we're delving into the story of Empress Matilda. Now, some of our listeners may be thinking, Empress Matilda, huh? Wasn't she just sort of like like a figure in the background of medieval England? But
Yeah.
that's really not the case at all, is it?
Not at all. I mean, she was right in the thick of it, especially during the Anarchy, which was this really brutal civil war that just tore England apart. And, the monarchy was really fragile back then. It was a time of upheaval and change.
Yeah, exactly. And I think her titles kind of tell you everything you need to know about her. I mean, Holy Roman Empress, Queen Consort of the Romans because of her marriage, and then, of course, the Lady of the English, although that one was definitely contested.
Yes, very much so.
So you can just see from that she was involved in all these intricate power dynamics, all this political maneuvering. It's really pretty amazing. And, even her coronation as Holy Roman Empress in St. Peter's Basilica back in 1116, that wasn't straightforward.
Right. It was controversial even then. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think even from a young age, you can see she's living a life surrounded by these huge tensions, both political and religious. So maybe we should start with her early life to get a better understanding of how she got to be such a prominent figure. What do you think?
Absolutely. I think that's the perfect place to begin. Let's go back to her early years. So Matilda was born likely on February 7th, 1102. It's not entirely certain, but it could have been either Winchester or Sutton Courtenay. And, of course, she was the daughter of King Henry VII of England.
Right, and Matilda of Scotland.
Yes, Matilda of Scotland. And, we can't underestimate how important that lineage was, especially her mother's side. She was descended from the West Saxon and Scottish royal lines, which, meant she was a direct descendant of Alfred the Great.
Oh, wow.
So that connection really helped to legitimize Henry the Caca's reign because, it wasn't exactly the smoothest transition of power before him.
It's interesting, isn't it, how bloodlines were just everything back then?
Absolutely.
I mean, it determines so much. And of course, Matilda was going to be named his heir, but she did have a younger brother, William Adelin, who actually sadly died.
Yes, very tragically.
But there were, of course, all the other siblings, 22, I believe, illegitimate siblings. I mean, that must have been a rather interesting dynamic in the royal household.
You would think. Talk about a full house.
I know, right? And another interesting thing, it's not so well known, but around 1108, both Matilda and her brother William were under the care of Anselm, the Archbishop of Canterbury,
Oh, wow.
who was, of course, a very important figure in the church. So I think that shows how much emphasis was placed on their education and upbringing.
Absolutely. And it's worth noting, a lot of descriptions from that time praise her beauty, but we do have to take those with a grain of salt. I mean, it was pretty typical for royalty to be described that way. It was almost like a standard compliment.
Yeah, that's a good point. So then things really started to change for Matilda when Henry V, the Holy Roman Emperor, proposed marriage.
Right. That was a game changer.
Yeah, I mean, this happened somewhere between late 1108 and early 1109. And for Henry VI, this was a huge win, a big power move.
Oh, yeah. Solidified his European connections for sure.
Exactly. I mean, it forged an alliance with one of the most prestigious, imperial houses. And of course, we have to remember that she was only 8 years old at the time of the marriage.
Yeah, which took place in 1114 in Worms in January, although they were betrothed earlier in 1110 in the Utrecht, and then crowned German Queen in Mainz in July of that same year. So it was all very ceremonial and, drawn out.
8 years old. I mean, it's just so hard to grasp, isn't it? But it was a different time.
It was.
And she didn't just sit back and watch. And she really got involved in the Holy Roman Empire, even served as a regent in Italy. And that must have given her some valuable experience in, governance and politics, how to deal with all these powerful people.
Absolutely. I mean, she was dealing with powerful Italian nobles, the papal authorities, that kind of thing. It was real-world experience.
Wow. And it was during this time in Italy that she claimed she was crowned Empress in Rome. Now, there's a bit of debate about that.
Right. The specifics are a bit hazy, like what exactly happened at the ceremony and who was this papal representative and what was their authority. But despite all that, it was widely accepted. Everyone believed her, and it really added to her prestige and reputation.
So even if the details are a bit murky, the title itself really had an impact.
Huge impact.
Yeah. And here's something I find really interesting. While she was in Italy, she probably gained a lot of practical day-to-day administrative experience. Managing those imperial territories, dealing with all the challenges of keeping control, putting policies into place. It's not something you typically associate with a woman in those times.
No, not at all. She got a level of hands-on expertise that most women, especially of her status, would never have had. And, it's interesting, this marriage, powerful as it was, they didn't have any children.
Hmm.
And some chroniclers back then kind of judgmentally blamed it on the emperor's, sins against the church,
What?
which, shows how much they believed in divine intervention, how everything that happened had some sort of religious meaning.
Yeah, the influence of religion it's striking. But of course, having no heir, well, that contributed to the succession crisis that was brewing back in England.
It absolutely did.
And then, the White Ship disaster in 1120, her brother, William Adelin, dies. And that's Henry VI's only legitimate male heir gone. I mean, imagine the chaos, everyone wondering what happens next.
Oh, it threw everything into disarray. Total uncertainty.
And what does Henrietta do? Well, he does something quite radical. He names Matilda as his heir. And not only that, he makes the Anglo-Norman nobility swear oaths of loyalty to her.
Right, which wasn't a popular decision at all.
No. I mean, can you imagine what the nobility were thinking? A woman ruling England? It had never been done before. Plus, she was married to the Holy Roman Emperor. Did that mean he would have influence? There were so many concerns.
Yeah, and not just societal norms about female leadership. They were probably worried about Matilda's ties to the Holy Roman Empire, what that would mean for England's independence.
Right, right. And then when Henry V dies in 1125, Matilda comes back to Normandy.
Which further complicated things.
Exactly. And that's when Henry V arranges her marriage to Geoffrey of Anjou in 1128. And this was mostly about protecting his southern borders in France. Right.
It's exactly. Strategic move.
But Matilda, well, she wasn't exactly thrilled about this match.
It's understandable. Geoffrey was younger than her. And, well, she probably saw him as socially inferior, having been married to an emperor before.
Right, an emperor. And of course, you can imagine the arguments, right? The dowry, what would happen to England and Normandy if Geoffrey had a claim.
Oh, yeah, all those practical matters.
It just added another layer of tension, on top of everything else that was going on. But they did have 3 sons, Henry, who would eventually become King Henry II, Geoffrey, Count of Nantes, and William, Viscount of Dieppe.
So that did eventually secure a line of succession, but boy, oh boy, did they have to fight for it.
Exactly. And then, things really exploded when Henry III died in 1135. Stephen of Blois, who was Matilda's cousin, just grabbed the throne, didn't even care about his oath to support Matilda.
It was a betrayal, plain and simple.
And that's how the anarchy began. I mean, talk about a family feud.
It was brutal. And understandably, Matilda and Geoffrey, their first priority was getting control of Normandy, especially for Geoffrey, who was keen on ruling there.
Right, but by 1139, Matilda decided, you know what, I'm taking back what's mine. So she invades England, and she's got some powerful allies, too. Her half-brother, Robert of Gloucester, and her uncle, David III, is of Scotland.
Talk about a powerful team.
And then in 1141, boom, the Battle of Lincoln. Matilda's forces capture Stephen. I mean, that was a major turning point, right?
Absolutely. It looked like she might actually take the crown.
Yeah, but it wasn't that easy. She tries to get crowned in London, but the people, they weren't having it. She never became queen officially.
Nope. Instead, she took the title Lady of the English, which, some historians see as her deliberately stepping outside the usual male titles. Maybe a way of saying, hey, I'm ruling on my own right, not through a husband.
That's interesting. So even though she wasn't crowned, she still wanted to project an image of power.
Oh, yeah, she was sending a message. And there's this less-known fact. After Robert of Gloucester got captured, Matilda agreed to exchange him for Stephen, a prisoner swap.
Wow.
Shows how shrewd she was. Understanding the power dynamics, willing to make difficult choices.
For sure. And then there's that story about her escape from Oxford Castle during a siege. She crossed the frozen river Isis, which is the Thames now, in the dead of night.
Wearing white, too, supposedly, to blend in with the snow. Pretty daring escape.
Absolutely. Talk about resourceful. But ultimately, despite all those wins, the war, it's just kind of stalemated. Matilda controlled the southwest, Stephen the southeast and Midlands. And the rest of England was basically this patchwork of lords switching sides all the time.
Yeah, it became really messy. And in 1148, Matilda realizes it's a stalemate. She's not going to win outright. So she goes back to Normandy and leaves her son Henry to carry on the fight.
Smart move. Long game.
Definitely. And it paid off. Henry eventually became King Henry II at 1154. The anarchy ended, and the Angevin Empire began. It was all made official with the Treaty of Wallingford, where Stephen finally acknowledged Henry as his heir.
So, even though she didn't become queen herself, she really set the stage for her son's dynasty.
Without a doubt. And even later in life, she was still very influential, administering Normandy for Henry, giving him political advice, even trying to mediate in the whole Becket controversy. She didn't just retire from politics. She was active right up until the end.
Yeah, she had all that experience. She had to put it to use. And it's interesting, she seemed to have a real soft spot for her youngest son, William.
Right. And she actually opposed Henry's plan to invade Ireland and give it to William.
Maybe she saw the potential problems with that, thought it was too risky.
She might have. She definitely wasn't afraid to stand up for what she believed in. And beyond politics, she was known for her piety. She founded Cistercian monasteries, which, was a common thing for rulers back then, showing their devotion.
Absolutely. So she dies in 1167 in Rouen. She was initially buried at Bec Abbey, but later moved to Rouen Cathedral. And her tomb has this inscription, great by birth, greater by marriage, greatest in her offspring. Here lies Matilda, the daughter, wife, and mother of Henry.
Powerful stuff.
It is. And one more thing, something that really shows her unique position. Her great seal, it depicted her enthroned, which was really unusual for noble women at the time. Their seals usually showed them standing. But Matilda, she's sitting on that throne, a real symbol of authority.
Absolutely. And then there's her choice of the title Lady of the English, or Domina Anglorum in Latin. It's interesting, her husband never used the male equivalent. So some historians argue that this suggests she saw herself as a ruler in her own right, not just through her husband.
It's fascinating how historians are still debating her, trying to figure out her motivations, her ambitions. And some feminist scholars argue that she's been judged too harshly, that we need to look at her through a different lens, taking into account the sexism of the time.
Totally agree. It makes you think, how would history be different if we judged everyone by the same standards, regardless of gender?
So here we are at the end of our deep dive into Empress Matilda. And even though she never officially wore the crown, she was an incredibly ambitious, resilient woman who really left her mark on English history.
Yeah, she fought hard for what she believed in.
And it makes you wonder, what if she had been accepted as the rightful queen from the start? How would things have been different? I think that's a question worth pondering.
It is. Well, thank you for joining us for this exploration of Empress Matilda. We'll see you on our next deep dive.
Bye, everyone.
Farewell.